Lakes are living creatures. These precious reserves of water live and die according to distinct natural cycles. Their peaceful waters seem dormant, yet they teem with mysterious life. Lakes only reveal themselves to the men and women who take time to patiently linger beside their shores. Together, we are going to discover their secrets. Along the shores of Lake Nasser, Egypt seems eternal and changeless. Yet these landscapes are the result of an enormous upheaval that happened barely 50 years ago. This ancient temple has been moved. These small islands used to be mountains, and no boats ever sailed here before. This vast expanse of water in the middle of the desert is actually an artificial lake stretching over 500 kilometers long. A man-made lake to meet human needs. A gigantic experiment that has transformed Egypt. What challenges and secrets are hidden within this lake that has swallowed up an entire region and at the same time given birth to a new ecosystem? Lake Nasser is a very young lake. It was born in the 1960s after the construction of a huge hydroelectric dam in Aswan. Back then, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser wanted to modernize his country. To accomplish this, he diverted the flow of the Nile, the second longest river in the world. Once the pharaonic work was completed, the Aswan Dam created an enormous lake. In Egypt, it is called Lake Nasser in honor of the president who made it. In Sudan, it is called Lake Nuba, named after the region that vanished beneath its waters. When it was created, Lake Nasser was the biggest man-made lake in the world. When filled to maximum capacity, this vast reservoir contains 169 billion cubic meters of water, a genuine treasure in one of the driest regions on Earth. Since it almost never rains in Egypt, the lake's waters answer all the country's needs. Before the lake was made, Egypt lived in sync with the Nile's flood cycle, which could cause devastating inundations. Now, the lake and dam allow Egypt to regulate the flow of the Nile and avoid the large-scale damage caused by seasonal flooding. It is a strategic water bank that has created a 30% increase in fertile land. Today, farmers can enjoy 2 or 3 harvests a year instead of just 1 in the past. Another benefit of the lake is that it enabled Egypt to escape the major droughts that plagued Africa in the 1980s and 1990s. The lake and dam have transformed the lifestyle of the Egyptian people. But how has nature adapted to this major change? For Egyptian wildlife, the lake has become a sort of El Dorado. Fish, birds, and crocodiles have all made the most of this new source of life in the heart of the desert. A handful of men have been entrusted to watch over and protect this immense artificial reservoir. Haitham Ibrahim is a ranger and bird specialist. Professor Gamal El-Shabrawi is an expert in aquatic plant life and lake sediment. Whenever they can, the two of them survey the huge expanse of water to assess the quality of the environment, possible changes, and overall health of the lake. The lake's ecosystem is still in its infancy in terms of evolution. Normally, it takes hundreds or even millions of years to strike a balance. Lake Nasser is one of the first large-scale man-made lakes and is a model and benchmark for those that have followed. Which species have disappeared and which have benefited from the transformation of a river habitat into a lake habitat? This winter, Haitham is trying to count the number of birds present on the lake. Even a partial census is important for measuring the evolution of this brand new ecosystem.
After the construction of the high dam, the habitat changed from a river to be a lake. So the water began to fill all the khors around the area, and the habitat changed very dramatically. And this really provide good habitats for lots of birds. Birds migrate from Europe and they follow specific pathway. And one of them is like flying over the river Nile to the south. And Lake Nasser is a fantastic area for them to rest, to feed, and then continue their way.
Thanks to the work of Haitham and volunteer ornithologists, over 130 species of birds have been recorded on the lake. The arrival of migratory birds in winter coincides with a seasonal drop in water level. The lower waters reveal many insects and larvae that they feed on.
But some of them like to spend the winter over here, but they don't breed. They spend the winter and then return back to Europe, like ducks species, wigeon, shoveler, teals. Also the waders, black-tailed godwit, common sandpiper, wood sandpipers. So Lake Nasser is very important, not only for the wintering species, but also for the summer visitors who came from Africa to the north.
Like the pink-backed pelican, which has taken up residency here more permanently. Or even the African pied wagtail, which has settled in little by little and now breeds on the lake. The results Haitham has observed in the field tend to show that certain endemic species, such as the Egyptian goose, which was endangered before the lake was created, have greatly benefited from this new environment.
The number now is increasing and they are doing very well breeding on the lake. And this is one of the good things which Lake Nasser do for birds.
The healthy evolution of the lake is also a constant concern for biologist Gamal El-Shabrawi, aquatic plant expert. This morning, he's heading off in search of macrophytes, one of his favorite subjects. The term macrophyte refers to all large water plants that can be seen with the naked eye. They're a good gauge of a healthy lake.
Ah, yes. These are macrophytes. Macrophytes are aquatic plants considered to be the keystone of any aquatic system.
These underwater plants produce oxygen and make up a particularly favorable environment for the development of numerous fish species. Here they're not seaweed, but plants with roots, stems, and flowers.
Plant-eating fish reproduce and grow among these aquatic plants. Here on Lake Nasser, tilapia feed on macrophytes. And tilapia constitute more than 90% of the fish living in the lake.
The abundance of this type of macrophyte in Lake Nasser means the water is not polluted. For Dr. El-Shabrawi, it's a reliable indicator that the lake is in good health.
You know, there are bad and there are good macrophytes. The bad macrophytes cover a very wide area of the lake, and they prevent oxygen from getting into the water. You can find bad macrophytes before and after Lake Nasser, and we're lucky because we don't find them here.
All these macrophytes grow in khors. In Arabic, khor means dry river. Before Lake Nasser was created, that's exactly what these valleys were. Canyons gouged out by rivers millions of years ago. Today, the khors are filled with the lake's waters, and one can boat on them. From the sky, they look like fractals branching across the surface of the desert. The lace-like geography of the khors has created thousands of kilometers of river coastline, about 7,400, which varies according to the flood level each year. It's a blessing for the fish that feed on macrophytes, as well as for a brand new fishing industry that didn't exist before. Six to 10,000 fishermen are estimated to work on the lake today. Before the dam was built, there were only a few hundred of them. They come from Fayoum, the Delta, or Middle Egypt. Hardly any are from around here. Many of them live in temporary camps, on islets or along the shores. They stay 3 to 6 months before returning to visit their families a few weeks and then coming back. The creation of the lake has not only changed the lives of these fishermen, it has also radically altered those of countless types of fish. Some have adapted and multiplied, while others have dwindled. Tilapia make up most of the catch. It is the species that has most benefited from the transformation of a river habitat into a lake habitat. We also find other types, like the bottlenose fish or the Nile carp, but they remain in the minority. Tigerfish, which used to be plentiful in the flowing waters of the Nile, have practically disappeared. These predatory fish, like the Nile perch as well, have great commercial value. They've suffered from overfishing and the change in their aquatic habitat. Most fishermen work in the cores, but some also cast their nets in the deep waters in the middle of the lake at sundown. At dawn, they pull them up with their catch. These fish are dried, salted, and sold exclusively in Egypt. There are now 3 small ports on the western coast of the lake: Aswan, Garf Hussein, and Abu Simbel. Fishermen come to deliver their catch or stock up on ice. When they are too far from port, some fishermen give their fish to a fridge boat that comes to collect their catch. After an auspicious period in the 1980s, the number of fish caught today falls short of what was expected. According to experts, almost half of the fish are missing.
Today is our 7th day out, and we've barely collected 1 ton. The zone we're covering doesn't contain many fish, and fishermen are catching fewer and fewer of them. Before, the fish were a lot bigger, but now fishermen are using nets with finer mesh to catch smaller fish. That has obviously caused a reduction in fish.
Haitham Ibrahim and Dr. Gamal al-Shabrawi continue their inspection of the lake. They now arrive within sight of the El Madik Gorge. It's the narrowest part of the lake, less than 1 kilometer wide.
Egyptian engineers had originally planned that they would build the dam here. But they then realized that most of the water would be in Sudan and not in Egypt. For this reason, they built the high dam in Aswan.
Construction of the Aswan Dam began in 1960. In all, over 36,000 Egyptian workers worked tirelessly day and night, sometimes in unbearable heat. In the summer, it frequently hits 45 degrees centigrade in the shade. This gigantic building project lasted 10 years. At the time, this pharaonic challenge was considered a victory over silent nature. A victory that allowed Egypt to achieve energy independence. With 2.1 gigawatts of power, equivalent to a nuclear reactor, the hydroelectric plant has brought light to cities and villages. New industries have developed along the Nile. Up until the 1980s, the dam provided over half of the country's electricity. Today, demand has increased, and it now only provides 25%.
When the dam was built, Egypt's population was only 25 to 30 million. Now there are 90 million of us, so obviously consumption has increased.
Progress and industrialization did not come without a cost. Once the dam was completed in 1970, Lake Nasser began to fill, flooding the entire Nile Valley between Aswan and northern Sudan. An entire region, Nubia and its ancestral culture, was engulfed beneath the waters like a modern-day Atlantis. At the time, over 100,000 Nubians were relocated to temporary accommodations in the desert, far from the Nile. Hundreds of thousands of date palms, their resource and treasure, disappeared forever. After years of exile, a few Nubians have begun to resettle along the lake. Fikri Kashef, for example, came back to live near the temple of Abu Simbel, where he worked as a guide. Here he has recreated the Eden of his childhood, as he remembers it before his entire family had to leave. He built a traditional home, an authentic hub of life and memory for his community. Here, Fikri and his friends continue to keep the traditional Nubian songs alive. Together, they remember the loss of their country and how the course of their lives was changed along with Egypt's. Dozens of Egyptian temples built along the Nile over 3,000 years ago also risked vanishing completely. UNESCO took emergency action, launching an appeal to the international community to salvage the most important ones. Some 50 countries took part in this astonishing rescue mission, which lasted over 10 years. This explains how the two temples at Abu Simbel, that of Ramses II and his wife Nefertari, were dismantled and rebuilt 64 meters uphill.
Here, the two temples of Abu Simbel were entirely carved into the rock in sandstone. UNESCO did something which was their most enormous undertaking ever. They cut the two temples into blocks.
The pillars were cut with very fine saws in the utmost of care. The stone is so fragile that the mere contact with water could turn it to dust.
The big temple was cut into 1,200 blocks, and Nefertari's temple into 450. In total, there were 1,650 blocks weighing between 10 and 33 tons. The blocks of crumbly sandstone were injected with synthetic resin to strengthen them.
Ramses II had his face amputated and taken to a storage zone. The distinctive rocky landscape around the temples had to be rebuilt exactly as it had been. In a modern exploit, the temples at Abu Simbel were thus moved safely and without harm down to the last piece. until the 20-meter-tall giants were able to be reassembled. The waters of Lake Nasser threatened these monuments of humanity's heritage, but international solidarity managed to save Abu Simbel, along with about 20 other of the most important ones. At the same time, another emblematic figure of ancient Egypt was making the most of this new aquatic world. Before the creation of Lake Nasser, crocodiles were endangered in Egypt. The abundant fish, calm waters, and the lace-like geography of the cores have given them the perfect environment in which to thrive once more. The lake literally saved the species. Fishermen, however, aren't necessarily thrilled at the demographic boom that's happened over the past few decades. Currently, the crocodile population is estimated at between 15 and 20,000.
We hunt crocodiles with a big fish on a hook. Then we put a piece of wood in its mouth and tie it with a rope. That way, its teeth sink in the wood and it can't open its jaw. After that, we pull it ashore. We take its skin to sell to merchants who pay 12 or 13 euros. The skins are used to make bags and shoes.
The crocodiles and fishermen settle in the same spots, where the most fish are found. Inevitably, things get a little tense between the competing predators.
If we cast our nets along the shore at night, the crocodiles get caught in them and completely tear them apart. That's why we hunt them. People hunt them because they're really dangerous. If they attack someone, they kill and eat him. They also attack our livestock when they go near the shore. They're not our friends.
Back in ancient Egypt, however, crocodiles were venerated. Entire temples were even devoted to them, like the temple of Kom-Ombo, located a few kilometers north of the lake. The crocodile god Sobek was intimately linked to the Nile and Egypt's prosperity.
The god Sobek was one of the most important Egyptian deities in all of its pantheon. He was noted for many things, but chief amongst them was the fact that he was a solar god, god of the sun. He was also associated with water, the inundation, and therefore he was important for fertility and in particular agriculture, because you need both the water and the sun to make your crops flourish.
The association with the sun no doubt came from the sight of crocodiles basking along the banks of the Nile. Like all reptiles, they constantly need to warm themselves in the sun's bright rays.
Sobek was worshipped not just as a statue, but also as a living god. Here in this pool at Kom-Ombo, he was kept as a living crocodile. And the priests of Sobek were very happy to take care of him because he would be fed, he would be given sweetmeats, he would be sung to, he would be perhaps even massaged, and he also was given beautiful earrings of gold and also bracelets of gold, so he shone like the sun.
Ancient Egyptians believed crocodiles had divinatory powers. They remarked that the creatures could predict how high the Nile would rise during the flood.
Female crocodiles would lay their eggs at specific points along the bank of the Nile. And in fact, they knew before the flood happened where it would come, so they could predict the height of the flood, and their nests would always be a little bit higher. So by looking at where crocodiles were making their nests, the ancient Egyptians were in fact able to judge the height of the flood.
The temple of the god Sobek was very important in ancient Egypt. Pilgrims would come from far away to be healed here.
They would use crocodiles particularly for medicine. So you would have the fat and the dung and the oil all used for different things. In fact, crocodile fat, when rubbed on the hair, was supposed to be a cure for baldness. And every bit of the crocodile was useful, even the penis, because some of the penises were as much as 1 meter long. So of course this was a symbol of male virility. And even today, in some of the more folkloric customs, pieces of crocodile penis are cut off, ground up and mixed with black honey, and then men eat it so that they can become very, very strong. Once the sacred crocodile had died, the priests would very carefully mummify the crocodile and either bury it in a catacomb or else even in the temples. These mummies have been found by archaeologists, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, and these are very useful tools to understand the crocodile cult.
More than 2,000 years later, these mummies have led to a fascinating scientific discovery.
Scientists have analyzed the mitochondrial DNA of crocodile mummies as well as of live crocodile populations, and they have found that there are actually two different kinds of crocodiles found in Egypt. One is the Crocodilus niloticus and the other one is the Crocodilus sucus. And it's very interesting because the sucus is a much calmer kind of animal. It isn't as fierce, it isn't as nasty, although it looks just like the other one. This means probably that the priests of ancient Egypt would have kept the sucus in the ponds in the temple because it was less likely to attack and savage them as well as the visitors.
This study has shown that the Sucus crocodile, highly present in West Africa, no longer exists along the Nile. Today, all we find in Lake Nasser are the more aggressive endemic variety, the Crocodilus niloticus.
It is quite possible, based on the scholarly findings of the DNA, that the crocodiles that were worshipped in Egypt actually were not native to the country, but were instead brought in from West Africa, maybe as gifts or maybe as special imports for the gods.
Perhaps these sacred crocodiles were offered to the pharaoh by an African king, but for the time being, no archaeological clues have been found to back up this hypothesis. Nubians perpetuate the cult of the crocodile and have maintained powerful ties with the animal. It's not rare to see a stuffed or painted crocodile on the front of their homes. For them, it acts as a protective symbol and a sign of prestige. Some of them even keep live crocodiles in their homes for good luck. This traditional practice is illegal since the Nile crocodile is a protected species. Illegal hunting of crocodiles on Lake Nasser has increased since the 2011 revolution. Most of the poachers come from Cairo or the Gulf countries and are willing to pay a premium to kill several specimens. Poaching isn't just a problem for crocodiles. Some types of birds are also targeted by hunters. This is especially true for birds of prey. Haitham Ibrahim wants to see if there are still falcons in the temple of Wadi Es-Sabua. In the past, he has seen several of them nesting here. This small temple beside the lake is associated with the falcon god Horus, symbol of the rising sun and warlike power.
So birds make lots of faces on the temple. This is mainly for swallows and maybe house sparrows. Sometimes doves is bigger size. So between the rocks and in the little holes, we can see lots of nests. A good number of house sparrow breeding inside here. But I can't see any falcons.
The presence of so many sparrows and swallows is a sure sign that no falcons are nesting here anymore.
People used to catch the falcons and sell to others who go hunting, and they train the falcon for hunting. So these strong and small-sized falcons really bring good money if they catch a juvenile one and they still have a chance to be trained. But on the other hand, if they catch a kestrel, which is not good for hunting or training, they kill it, stuffed, and then sell as a decoration. So this really affects the total population of this species around the area here.
Once his inspection of the lake is complete, Haitham remarks that there are a lot fewer birds than in previous years.
We try to understand why. Maybe because we have a really cold winter than the last 5 years. Also, the hunting still going on in Lake Nasser, which is really affecting lots of species.
Each year, the water level in Lake Nasser rises several meters during flood season. This seasonal phenomenon originates each summer in Ethiopia. Heavy rains swell the Nile into a gushing torrent that sweeps away the black soil of Ethiopia. The current used to distribute silt along the Nile Valley all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. This silt is what enabled Egypt to become a great agricultural civilization in antiquity. Because the Nile carried this fertile soil to the heart of the desert. But today, the Nile has been stopped cold in its tracks and dumps most of its precious sediments into Lake Nasser. Egypt has tamed the Nile and put an end to this natural cycle. But what is the actual impact of this progress?
The sediment is a long story. We have many effects in Egypt from these sediments. Only 3% of the sediment can pass through the High Dam. And considering that the lake receives 100 million tons of sediment yearly, you can imagine what this sediment can do.
Samples and scientific analyses have shown that over the past 40 years, an incredible amount of alluvium has been deposited in Lake Nasser. over 96 million cubic meters per year. The sediment is deposited mainly in the middle of the lake.
In the southern part of Lake Nasser, the sediment has raised the level of the riverbed by 50 meters.
Little by little, Lake Nasser is being smothered, asphyxiated by the alluvium deposited in it. All lakes gradually fill this way, but the phenomenon is particularly pronounced in reservoirs, and especially in Lake Nasser. If sedimentation continues at this pace, the lake could be completely filled in less than 300 years, much faster than engineers predicted at the time of its creation. The sediment is now beginning to form a new delta in Sudan, at the mouth of the Nile in Lake Nuba. Consequently, there is a serious shortage of it elsewhere, further north. Bereft of its silt, the Egyptian delta is slowly disappearing. Its natural erosion is no longer compensated by the regular arrival of fresh soil, endangering the country's largest agricultural zone. To make up for the absence of silt, Egyptian farmers use a lot of chemical fertilizers. This practice further pollutes the river and impoverishes the soil. Egypt will need to find a solution to this problem in the years to come.
This piece of silt deposit comes from a village along the Nile. It's from 1962, the last flood before the dam.
For Nubians like Shaban, who grew up along the Nile before the lake was created, silt was much more than just fertilizer.
Silt is a fertilizer, but Nubians also used it as medicine. We used it to make masks for protection from the intense heat. We used it for pregnant women and to treat constipation. All you had to do was eat a piece of it. Silt is Egypt. If there's no silt, Egypt doesn't exist, because Egypt has always been an agricultural country. In Arabic, the word dam, said, means to block. How can something that blocks be positive?
Another huge dam on the Nile could completely change the stakes in years to come. Located in Ethiopia 2,000 kilometers upstream from Lake Nasser, the Renaissance Dam is slated for completion in 2017. When it begins operating, a large artificial lake will be formed in Ethiopia. For the decade or so it takes to fill this new reservoir, it will have a decisive impact on Lake Nasser. On the plus side, the lake will receive less sediment. On the downside, the flooding of the Nile will bring a lot less water. The lake's water level is likely to drop drastically, to the point of losing part of its ecosystem, the cores, the lace-like branches of the lake where most of the fish breed. And that's exactly what worries Dr. El-Shabrawi.
When the dam in Ethiopia is completed, it will be a disaster for Lake Nasser, particularly for the littoral area. The level of the lake will drop a lot, maybe more than 20 meters, and we will lose thousands of kilometers of littoral. The tilapia depends on these areas for breeding and as a nursery ground.
Dr. El-Shabrawi thinks the fishing industry on the lake is going to sorely feel the effects. But he has an idea to counterbalance this eventuality. The middle of the lake holds an extremely high concentration of zooplankton, but not many fish species feed on it.
There is a great deal of plankton here, which settles as organic matter in the sediment. So we would like to have this consumed.
His idea is to introduce a new type of fish, a freshwater sardine, which feeds specifically on this type of zooplankton.
It's a species of sardine that has been introduced into other African lakes, and it increases the production of these lakes. And it's providing a catch for more than 10,000 fishermen.
Nevertheless, Dr. El-Shabrawi is aware that this kind of operation is quite complicated and carries certain risks.
To introduce a new species into a lake is very, very dangerous. We should do all the research concerning its feeding habits and its effects on the water quality beforehand, to see how it interacts with other species and to see if it reproduces in the lake or not. This is very important. We need 2 or 3 years of study before we can introduce it safely into the lake.
Lake Nasser's water is a strategic issue for Egypt. And yet this precious resource continues to dwindle. Close to 8% of the lake's water evaporates each year before it reaches the dam. Meanwhile, the country must use more and more to meet the needs of its constantly growing population. In less than 40 years, the population of Egypt has increased from 30 to 90 million. Most of its inhabitants are gathered along the Nile Valley, the country's only fertile zone, which only represents 4% of the Egyptian territory. This enormous demographic and environmental pressure has given rise to the New Valley Project. This huge undertaking was inaugurated in 1997 by former President Mubarak. Its ambition? To create a new fertile valley by pumping water from Lake Nasser. Billions have already been invested, but no one is able to give an exact figure. First, a gigantic pumping station, the second largest in the world, was built and set beside the lake. The water is first filtered into a large basin, then pumped and directed to an open-air canal heading straight into the desert. After 70 kilometers, the canal divides into 3 sub-canals. At its inception, the New Valley Project was meant to bring hundreds of thousands of hectares of new land forth from the sand and relocate 6 million Egyptians. But for the moment, this vast project is on hold. Only a few pilot farms are using water from the canal. They grow dates, mangoes, alfalfa, and grapes right in the middle of the desert. They even attempt to raise sheep. But for the time being, these farms are making no profit whatsoever. The project is turning out to be much more difficult to fund and make happen in the field than its developers had foreseen. Temperatures can drop from 50 to 0 degrees Celsius between noon and midnight. Farmland must be watered constantly to prevent the salt in the soil from rising to the surface. The extreme dryness of the desert and dust storms complicate things even more. If the level of Lake Nasser drops in years to come due to the Ethiopian dam, the New Valley project will be jeopardized even further. "50 years ago, Lake Nasser was the solution to Egypt's problems. Today, it is at the heart of the huge challenges the country faces. Will Egyptians manage to preserve this lake, which provides the water, electricity, and fish they need?
What we see today in Lake Nasser, we might not see tomorrow, with all of this changing which is going on around the River Nile in other countries. Lake Nasser is one of the biggest lakes made by man. So it's really good to be here, witness to the changes which happened around the lake. And it's a unique example to study the man-nature reactions. We should really work hard to protect this place before we lost it.